You are to be aware of your individual interpreted code. And you are to measure that code against the idea of your true desire. When the code is aligned with the idea, you re-accept that code into the mind. This feeds into the total code. It affects the overall, and it affects your evolving individual interpretation. This was the last paragraph that we read last week, if I remember correctly. What Spirit is talking about here? The code is not just what we call ego in our Course in Miracles language. The code would include Holy Spirit. All right? The code is both ego and Holy Spirit. So what this is saying is that when a thought comes into the mind, for example, what I am to do is to look at that thought and literally discern or judge that thought against my true desire. My true desire being at this point specifically to be free of hate, permanently and forever free of hate. We could say our true desire is to know the peace of God. We could say our true desire is to know thy capital S self. We could say our true desire is to know only love, right? It's somewhere along those lines. So when a thought comes into my mind, what I'm to do is I'm to look at that and I'm really to ask, is this aligned with my true desire? So if my thought, my very specific goal at this time, remember, was to be free of hate, be completely free of it. So if the thought comes into the mind that I hate Laurent because, it's not rocket science to look at that thought and say, this is not aligned with my goal. It is not rocket science. It's not rocket science. It's only a matter of how much I'm ready for my goal. It's a matter of willingness. But you don't have to be the smartest person on the planet Earth to figure this stuff out. You just have to want it. And I did. I really wanted it. So the thought comes into my mind, I hate Laurent because. I look right at that thought and I say, but what I want is to be free of hate. This thought is not aligned with my purpose. And I let go of the thought solely because it's not aligned with my purpose. Now this is another place where people get stuck. Because people still have this belief that the form has to change. Now, the interesting thing about the stories that were going on at this time is the stories about why I, quote, hated Laurent, is that you could say there was proof in form. You know, like he was buying expensive water, for example. You know, he was, like I said, not as clean as I was around the house. He was staying up all night and sleeping very late into the day. These were the things that my mind was telling me I hated about him. He was doing these things. So when the thought came into my mind that said, I hate Laurent because, I couldn't argue with the thought at the level of form. I couldn't say, oh, but he doesn't really buy expensive water, because I'd get home and notice he'd gone and bought expensive water while I was gone, right? That didn't work. The only thing that was going to allow me to let go of that thought was wanting the peace of God, or the way I worded it then, wanting to be free of hate. It had nothing to do with Laurent. Literally, this was all about me. I've heard the term divine selfishness. That's what we could talk about here. This was all about me wanting to be free, and all about me realizing that the reason I wasn't free is because I continually believed these hate thoughts, and they were driving my experience, what the first paragraph said. And if I wanted to be free of that experience, I could not continue to allow these thoughts. So when the thought came into my mind, I hate Laurent because, right, I needed to look at that thought and not say, is it true or not true that he does this? I needed to look at that thought and say simply, is that thought aligned with my purpose? Do you see how that's different? Is this thought aligned with my purpose? No. Then I need to choose not to accept this thought, to put this thought aside, to realize this is not a thought I want. Now, if another thought comes into my mind, let's say Laurent walks through the door with a a case of expensive water, and the thought comes into my mind, breathe. Wait a minute. Now, is that thought aligned with my purpose? Actually, at that point, that thought may have been very aligned with my purpose. That thought was telling me to step back, not go into the automatic reactions. Breathe, right? Breathe. Pause. That's a thought, then, I choose to listen to. This is what we call discernment. So I look at thoughts when they come into my mind. The only question, not is this true or false in form, that's irrelevant. The only question is this thought aligned with my purpose or not? If it is aligned with my purpose, I totally accept it, I follow it, I do what it says. If it's not aligned with my purpose, I let it go based on that fact. Now I'll tell you a funny little story. During this time, I received guidance to join the gym. I actually received the guidance 3 times before I took it seriously, and the third time was so funny. My neighbor across the street, for some reason, this is so bizarre. I'd already received the guidance twice, and I kind of blew it off because I judged it as not the type of guidance that Holy Spirit would give. So the third time the guidance came, the way it happened is my neighbor came over to my door in her dripping wet swimsuit, in her swimsuit. I've never seen her do this. This is a 46-year-old woman. She doesn't walk around the neighborhood in a dripping wet swimsuit. She came over in her dripping wet swimsuit and asked me if I'd ever been to the Y. I was like, I think I'm supposed to join the gym. That was like the third piece of guidance in a row, and that was the one that hit me over the head. So I joined the gym, and I didn't know why I was joining the gym, of course. But I'll tell you what happened is that I had gotten myself so worked up with my hate thoughts that, to be honest, I was in a state where it was very difficult to step back and look at them and practice the code. And I know that there are people in the room now who are at that same level because I've talked to some of you in the past week. So I know that you hear the code, you hear the logic of the code, but it's very difficult for you to step back at the current experience of hate that you're at and look at those thoughts. They come in and you fall for them, right? They come in and you fall for them, and you do it over and over and over again. I was in that same place. So as it turned out, I went and joined this gym. But what I found was when I got on the treadmill and I started running, and I guess it's the endorphins, is that what it is? Yeah, the endorphins kicked in. Somehow, once the endorphins kicked in, something changed where I was able to look at those thoughts in a different way. And I could jog on that treadmill and watch these thoughts come in, and I could practice the code. I could say, that's a hate thought. I could do this. That's a hate thought. I am not interested in hate thoughts. I choose not to listen to that thought. Boom, here comes another one. That's a hate thought. I have no interest in hate thoughts anymore. And I could do it when I was jogging. That's why I joined the gym. I did the majority of my practice of the code in the beginning while jogging. Now what happened as I got better and better is I didn't need that anymore. Then I could practice it, in the house, even while having a conversation with Laurence. Like I could practice it, you would say, live. But in the beginning, I was so caught up in the experience of hate that I needed that other location and those endorphins, I think. So that's how I got started, by jogging. And the truth is, after I was done with the code, the whole gym thing just kind of fell away. I quit going again. But it was very helpful during this period of time. So, you are to be aware of your individual interpreted code. And you are to measure that code against the idea of your true desire. When the code is aligned with the idea, right, you reaccept that code into the mind. So when it's something that's aligned with your goal, you listen to it. But when the code, when the code is aligned with the idea, you reaccept that code into the mind. That feeds into the total code. It affects the overall, and it affects your evolving individual interpretation. Now the next paragraph. If the code, as it is received, is not aligned with true desire, it is time to recognize yourself as creator and edit the code. Editing of code is making a change. so that the code, as it was received, is not the idea accepted into the mind as true. In other words, you do not feed the unaligned idea back into the total code of the world. Or said another way, the idea is not shared into the mind that is the sonship. So what Spirit is saying here is that, if the thought comes into the mind, I hate Laurent because, and I look at that and I say, wait a minute, that is not aligned with my purpose. And I choose not to believe that. I've taken out one little bit of hate. I've released one little bit of hate from our entire mind. I've freed all of us. I've freed all of us in that decision. If the thought comes into my mind, I hate Laurent because I hate him, I go off on that, I've fed that right back into our entire mind. We all get a piece of that. So I'm really being what we would call a miracle worker here. I'm really being a miracle worker when I'm choosing to look at these thoughts and to let go of, not believe, not follow any thought that is not aligned with my purpose. I'm being a miracle worker because I'm removing that piece, that energy, that vibration, that from the entire mind. It's being released instead of refed. It's either refed or released. Those are the options. So this is how we are truly miracle workers. It's going to affect my individual experience, but it's also going to affect the whole. It's going to affect the entire future and all of the possibilities that are not yet determined. It's absolutely amazing.